Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunday session for Android Basics Nano Degree. This live streaming is about the habit tracker, but I will try to make it a little bit more interesting and maybe discuss some other bits and bobs about Android and what you can do with some tools that Android SDK provides. Cool. So if you have any questions, then let me know. Put your question on the Slack channel, Habit Tracker app. I will keep an eye on this one. And this live broadcast will go on for the next 3 hours. There will be breaks of 10 minutes in between. So I will let you know when we are closer to the break. So you can maybe take the break at the same time. So the Habit Tracker app, just to give a quick overview, allow you to test your skills on Android SQLite database and how to persist the data using that structure. Purpose of the app is to create a very simple application that save the data into the database and read the data from the database. So it's very important that first you design the database according to the specification, and then you construct a way to read the data and the way to insert the data. There is one question about, do we need to follow the videos to be able to finish this app? It's very important that you understand how to design a database and how to understand which columns you need and which data types you need, and also what are the main classes in Android to information and create tables into the database. So I think the first set of lessons, the one that is basics about database, it's a general overview about what databases are and why it's important to use them. But what is very important for the Habit Tracker project is the lesson about using a database in an Android app. So, sort to say, if you already have experience in other programming language or in other application about how to design a database, maybe you might want to skip the first set of lesson, that is the database basics. So going back to the Habit Tracker, if we go through the specification, we can see that the app doesn't require any UI. So it will be sufficient for you to pass the project to just, for example, log the message into the Android console, or maybe like present all the string of information in the text view. So don't get too worried about creating a list component or use the cursor adapter. These are all topics that will get discovered and studied in the next lessons after the Habit Tracker. So for now, you don't have to worry about that. We just try to understand the mechanics of dealing with the database on Android. So in this project, there are actually four important specifications to cover. The first one is actually being able, with the paper and pen, to define the table. And this means understand from the context of the app what tables you need. So what's your schema? What are the columns that are required for the database? And also what are the data types that you should use for that, for each column. So that's the first part. And you can easily do that with paper and pen and just try to understand how things fit together in that domain, in the space of tracking a habit for the user. One thing I found it really helpful is, for example, starting from a Google Sheet. So have a Google spreadsheet in front of you and try to figure it out. If you had to record all your habit in a spreadsheet, how will you do that? And maybe after you have the sample data, you can kind of abstract of what are the columns you need and what are the data type. I found that quite useful, and I think this is also one of the technique that might be the most immediate to understand, especially if you have never dealt with database. So this is table definition. And then there are three different aspects: table creation, insert of data, and reading of data. All of these require two main classes on Android. One is the contract class, and the other one is the SQL DB helper. So now that the chat is quite calm, and there are not many viewers, I might be able to also take a little bit more time and go through the code. So let me open my Android Studio, and then we can look at how a contract class look like, what's the purpose of a contract class, and also how a DB helper looks like. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen, and hopefully everything will be okay. Okay, cool. So there are two main classes that are relevant when dealing with the database on Android. So before thinking about that, two words of advice. One, storing data or persisting data in the database is not the only way you can persist information on Android. So we might be able to cover at some point the other two ways you can achieve that. The second thing to remember is also that before actually writing the code, especially for the habit tracker, it's very important that you think about what table you need for this specific context. You understand what columns of the table you will require, and this will become your attributes. And then you define the data types. So once you do that, you are in a position to actually start writing the code. So let me go into the contract class. So why it's important to have this class, and what's the purpose of this class? So this class is important for three main reasons. First of all, it will allow you to define the schema and also have a convention for where to find the database constant. Imagine you have more than one table in your database and your apps is a little bit more complex than this first version. If you want to use the columns and some specific constant throughout the application, you do not want to find yourself retyping the name of the column everywhere. You want to have a single place where all this information are recorded, and then reuse that information in the form of this constant. Another reason why it's important to have a contract is because it reduces misspelling. So just imagine if you have to write habit, the habit column, throughout the application. And sometimes you can type it habit with the H, sometimes you might forget about the H, and so on and so forth. And this will create lots of overhead in terms of finding mistakes. Last one, the contract class is important because it helps with the process of updating the schema. So if at any point in time we will need to change a column name, it's very important that we have a single place where we can make that change. So I jump quickly on Slack just to make sure that everything is okay. Cool. And so that is your contract class. So there has been some questions yesterday about, do I need a contract class per table? Do I need to have a single contract class? So my preference will be to have a contract class per table, so that you can, when you call back the class, and the column within the code, you have a more intuitive way, different column. So for example, you will say, if I have an habit tracker table and I have a user table, it will be easier within the code and more readable for other developer to actually type habit tracker contract dot entry dot habit, and for the user have user contract dot entry dot, for example, username. So it makes your code a little bit more readable. So this is your contract class. And then you have what we call the helper, the DB helper class. So the DB helper class is a little bit more, has a little bit more logic in it. So first things to remember is that the helper class extend SQLite open helper, and this class contain all the logic to manage database creation, to do version management, and also contain all my query to the database. That can be insert, it can be a select statement, and so on. So first things to look at is the constructor. So the constructor of habit tracker helper, in my case, takes 4 different parameters. The first one is the context. The context will be used to set up the instance of the SQLite open helper. Database name, that is the name of the database file, and we can go later on to see how we can find that information. This one is related to a factory that is used when you want to create a cursor object. So in this case, you can just forget about that part, because we are not going to use cursor. And then database version. Database version is something a little bit, not a lot considered, but it's quite important, especially if you are going to maintain and improve your database. For example, in production application, can happen that from time to time, you have to change your database schema. And it's important for Android SDK to understand if the database has changed since the last version. So something that we will cover once we will go into the on-create and on-upgrade. So if you create a database for the first time in your application, your version will be version 1. Try to maintain the versioning in an incremental way, because this is what the Android SDK is looking for. So for example, if you start with the standard habit tracker, that will be version 1. if later on, after people have downloaded your app and using the app, you want to upgrade the app with a second table, then your database will be database version 2, and then 3, and then 4, and so on and so forth. Then we have two important methods that the helper class override from the parent class, SQLite Open Helper. One is on create and one is on upgrade. These two methods are called a different moment of the application lifecycle. On create is called only once when the app is when the database, is created for the first time. As soon as the database is created, no matter how many times you launch the app, the database will not get recreated, because the Android SDK will know that you have already installed for that app the database version 1, as specified here. So he's not going to try to recreate. He will skip the on create. What is important to remember is that if you instead delete the app and reinstall, this, of course, the on create will be call it again, because at that point, by doing the uninstall of the app, you have cleared the data of the application, so that the Android SDK have lost track of your app having or not the database for the first time. Then we have on upgrade. On upgrade is called every time the version of your database change. There are different ways you can approach upgrading of database. This very simplistic one is dropping the table and recreate. However, in live scenarios, this is not very, it's not recommended, because you can imagine that if someone is started using your app, what's most likely to happen is that they have already started inserting data in the database. So if you drop the table and recreate it, what happens is that the user will lost all his data, and this is not something really nice. So another thing that you can do is actually just make update of tables, or use different type of mechanism to modify current table instead of just dropping and recreate it. For the habit tracker app, we then need to perform two specific actions. One is the insert and one is the read. So the insert of the habit is a write operation. So the Android SDK needs to know that this operation will require a write permission into the database. To tell that to the Android SDK, we instantiate an SQLite database with a write permission. So this is what this statement says. After that, we just want to create my content values with all the different values in the column. I'm gonna call the insert method for the SQLite database that insert the values that I've just created in my content values inside the table I have specified. So this is one of the first example of how having a contract class will help make your code more readable. And this is why. So you can see this line. For whoever other developer come along, they will understand that in there is a contract that contains some entry, and one of the entry is the colon comment. So even without looking at the contract class itself, it's an easier way to also making sure we maintain consistency throughout the application. Another functionality that is required is read habit. So the reading operation do not require to have the right permission, because we don't need to perform any operation in terms of changing data into the database. We just need to have a read permission. And again, as happened with the insert, this statement has to have an instance of SQLite database, but with a read permission. And the most important part of this method is actually the query method of the SQLite database. The query method that turns a cursor, and this is an object that will be quite useful later on in the course when you will look at cursor adapter and cursor loader. So keep that in mind. We take different arguments. The first one is in which table you want to perform your query. In my case, is the habit tracker table. Second is which column do I want to be returned. So this is an array of string, and I can specify all the columns I need. If I put null, by default it will return all the columns. Then this other one, maybe it's better if I go in the query of the SQLite database. So this other argument, selection, represent the filter I want to apply on my query. Or for whoever is familiar with SQL statement, this is my where clause. Of course, if I pass null, it means that I return all the rows, so I completely ignore any filtering. And it's very important, and if you want to know more about that, you can watch the videos of Saturday afternoon. It's very important that the where is written in a way that prevents SQL injection. Just to say, the filtering, for example, if you want to do filtering on date, it will be date equal question mark. And the value of the question mark is then passed using selection args. This is because if we try to construct the string ourselves and we are not very diligent on checking for a strange character or SQL injection manually in the code, it's most likely that we'll end up exposing the app to this type of attack. But if you want to know more, I think yesterday afternoon I went through different examples of how to exploit this type of problem and what are the results if someone malicious want to do that. Cool. Then we have group by. Group by is a clause that allow you to group, as the word say, the result by a specific condition. Then you have having. Having is a filter that allow you to understand or reduce the amount of row groups to include in the final result. Of course, any of these things is optional, so if you don't want to specify any having or any group by, you can just put null. And then order by is quite useful if you want to sort your result by a specific condition. For example, in case of the habit tracker, you might want to order your result by, or sort your result by date, or you want to sort your result by activity. type. So all these type of things can be easily done with the order by statement. Cool. So once you have done that, if I go back to my I will go back to my helper class. So once you have the contract class and the helper class, you should be 80% there in terms of your application. The only other things left is to actually go in the main activity and call the method you have just created. So you can call insert a couple of times, like I did, just to have something in the database. And then what you can do, you can loop, once you get the cursor back from the read habits part, you can loop through the cursor and just understand what are the values. And what I did here, just because I was very lazy, just log it into the Android console. So this part is actually quite interesting, and maybe I can spend a little bit more time on that. So when you get back the cursor, it's very interesting that you understand which type of projection you have set up in your read habits or in your query to the database. Because if you, for example, try to get a string from a column 0 and instead it was an integer, you will get an exception. So I should be aware of the type of column I'm expecting. So this column will be 0 based. So if you go back in read habit, what I'm asking is that the first is the ID, then I want the date. So this is column number 1. The ID, because it's a 0 based, is column number 0. Column date is my column number 1. Column habit is the number 2. And column comment will be number 3. So going back to main activity. At this point, I already know that in column 0, I'm expecting the ID. The ID is an integer, so I call cursor.getInt. And I also know all these other one, and I also know that, for example, the column number 3, the return from the projection, is a string because it's my comment. I get the value using the get string. If in this position I would have said get int, I would have had some exception in the console arriving at that point. So everything would have compiled correctly, but on compilation time everything would be fine, but on execution time I would have had an exception, so the app wouldn't have worked. Cool, so once you do that, your habit tracker is ready to be submitted. So I hope this is helpful and it will help you kind of understand the thinking behind. One thing I said at the beginning was that there are different ways to, let me go back. Stop. Okay, there are different ways that you can persist data on Android. So one way, that is the one you're discovering right now, is the SQLite database. And for your information, SQLite is a good way to do that manually. So what you are experimenting with the habit tracker app, it's something that you will find very familiar. However, what will happen in the real life is that most of the time you will use a library. One of a very nice library to deal with the SQLite database is a Realm. I think I posted the link yesterday at some point, but I'm more than happy to repost it. Then the other way you can save data persist data in the app is files. The file system is a very good place if you want to save media or if you want to save photos or videos. For example, the camera app might have a SQL database where you store at which time the picture was taken, in which location, for example, lat and long, but then it will rely on the fact that the picture itself is saved into the file system. Third way is to use the share preference. Share preference should only be used for in-app user preference. For example, the typical example is an app that has a conversion and you want to configure your preferred unit of conversion. For example, if I'm in US, I might prefer miles over kilometers. If I'm in Europe, I might prefer kilometers over miles, and so on and so forth. So that type of preference can be saved in share preference. There is what I call a fourth one, and this is particularly helpful if you are concerned about privacy and protecting the data. And this is the key store. So the key stores allow you to store all the type of information under encryption. And it can be user encryption or it can be device-generated encryption. Again, if you are interested, just let me know and I can post the more information about key store. This is a preferred option when it comes to encryption rather than encrypting the database. And this is because encrypting the whole database or even every single table is proven on Android and in general on devices with limited capacity to be a quite expensive operation. So you can do that. I mean, everything is possible, but it might create some latency in terms of reading and writing operation, as you can imagine. Cool. Enough of the talking. I'm going through the different questions. And there is a snippet of code posted by James that is on Create with SQLite database. So I'm just copy that on my Sublime, just because it might be easier than so this is a create statement, and there is a create table with the table name. Then there is habit entry.id, integer, primary key, auto increment, workout, that is a text, not null, date of workout, that is an integer, not null. So I think what is a problem here is that the gender at the end has a comma, but it doesn't have a closing of the bracket. So if I post this back, I think someone already replied, but yes, what was missing there was that habit entry column gender. So the last statement there might be, it was missing. Instead of having the colon at the end, the comma at the end, you should have the closing of the bracket. So hopefully that will be okay. So again, this type of error are very, it's something that you will find more and more often if you had to write the SQL statement yourself, all the crude operation yourself. What happened in real life when you actually have a production application is that you don't need to worry about the SQL statement so much. You are going to deal with more of an object-oriented way to interact with the database, especially if you use things like Realm as a third-party application. But unfortunately, for this type of exercise, it's important that you understand the mechanics of SQL, so you get familiar with that. So there is a question from Thomas about where to have the insert habit method. A strict place that you can put the insert habit method for like maybe it's more like coding style. I will prefer to have everything that is related to the database somehow separated from what I call the view. That is my activity. So the only thing that the activity needs to know is that at some point it needs to call a method of some other class that perform the insert, and then get eventually the result back. So if it's in the main activity for this specific application, it doesn't matter, but I would say that I will recommend to have everything that is related to DB and DB operation maybe separated from the view of your application that should only handle with view element and just call or delegate functionality to other part of the application. So I hope that makes sense. But so it doesn't have necessarily be DB helper. It can be another class that call DB helper, but it's better to, so I would say I will prefer, if I had to code review, for example, not to have it in the main activity just because it doesn't belong. It's a part of functionality that doesn't, how do I say that? That don't necessarily have to have anything to do with the view. It's just manipulating data. So there is a question about Stato. I know that some people use this tool. This tool is quite useful, or what I found it particularly useful is if you have web views and you want to debug that part of the application. I found that there are other ways without actually have your phone, a rooted device, maybe using an emulator, that you are able to actually see the database and make changes. So maybe, and now thanks to the lesson yesterday that my computer crashed when I tried to use the actual tool, I took the screenshot so I can share with you what you can do without using Stato, because Stato also requires you to make changes in the code base. And I normally do not like if it's a tool that should observe something happening in the app, I will prefer that to be completely outside. I don't want to have dependencies, because if you think about that, every time you add the dependencies, your application in some way is gonna grow in size. So for as much as I can, I like to use tool that Android Studio and Android SDK provide, and only when there is nothing out there that can do that, then I can use like third party. As I said, the Stato, I've used it quite successful if you have a web view on your application and you want to debug the web view. I don't think there is any other tool from the Android SDK that does that. But for database, there is something that help you with that. The only thing to remember if you want to use the Android SDK tool is that you might want to have the app running on an emulator. So I hope that might be useful for you, Mikael. So let me share my screen again. So if it's okay, Mikael, I show you, first of all, how to do that without Stato. I never use it myself to look at the database part, but because also the other thing is that is very command line, a type of way to do that, like the overhead of actually doing that, it kind of defeat the purpose of using a third-party library, if you know what I mean. Because you can do the command line also if you just download the DB file and look at it. I mean, but anyway, let's see if I can. So I show you this tool, and if you're still interested in Stato, maybe after the break, we can also look at that one. I think I will do a break at about 15, 25, 30 minutes, more or less. So let's see. So screen sharing, cool. So you have your Android Studio. Let me see if you can see it properly. Yeah, I think it's all right. So this is your Android Studio. And imagine that you have your app. I'm not going to run the emulator because last time I did, the video and the audio went horribly wrong. So I have a screenshot for that, but hopefully you can follow me through. So important things about database is that, as Michael was suggesting, you need to have a rooted phone. Whoever is not familiar with the concept of rooted phone, a rooted phone is a phone where you are an admin of your application, of your device, meaning that you have access to all the files and all the so-called file system within the application. Okay, so one thing that it's also good to know is that if you can convert your phone to be a rooted device, I will discourage that because your phone will be out of warranty if you do that. So just be careful. However, if you use the Android emulator, the emulator is already a rooted device. So what you can do, at the top bar of your Android Studio, there is a tools actually, then Android, and then you have Android Device Monitor. So Android Device Monitor, unfortunately, there is not enough time to go through all the feature of it, but it's quite interesting one. Maybe at the end, I will show you some other cool stuff. So Android Device Monitor is a tool that comes with the Android SDK and help you to debug and profile your application. And it gives you so many information that otherwise you will not get. Most of that information you can get actually from your real phone. But for when it comes to information like a database, you will need an emulator. So let's assume I click on this one, and now I'm gonna open a screenshot of it. Just because of my laptop and resources sharing, it will take my laptop down if I try to to be very clever. But I have a nice screenshot, so hopefully you trust me that this is what is happening. So just let me check. Okay, so as you can see here, so this is your Android device monitor as soon as you open it. It's important to understand three different sections of this window. Sorry, I need to close the window. There are too much traffic going on. Okay, cool. So, so we have three areas of the Android monitor. Area number one, this one, is your device. So at the top you have the name of your device. In my case, it was an emulator. And underneath, all the processes that are running on your device. One of these will be your application, for example, the habit tracker. Then we have this part of the window on my right side. And this part is a series of tabs or view perspective, however you want to call it, that will give you different type of information about memory, threads, files, network statistics. So this, if you have the time and if you are interested about profiling and application or memory usage, we can talk about that maybe another time. And then underneath here, you have the classic Android monitor, your Android console, exactly the same one that you have in your Android Studio. Just make sure that I don't have any, yeah. If at some point the audio, the video stuck, just let me know on the Slack channel, because yesterday was quite fiddly. Cool. So now what I want to do, I want to understand the database of my application. So what I'm doing, I'm gonna select from the right side my application name, and then I will go on the left side, and then I will go on the right side on the File Explorer tab. And between all the folders, I will have a folder called Data. Under the folder, there will be another folder called Data. And then inside that one, I will have all these, as you can see here, all these subfolders. You can notice, maybe I can zoom in, that these folders have, like if you see, if I take one, for example, these have the folder name is exactly your app name. So you can easily go through them and find your application about the habit tracker. In my case was com.udacity.fcuda.habit_tracker. So click on that and you will see this structure. So this structure is actually really interesting because you have a folder called cache, a folder called databases, and then a lib. So the databases folder, if you open it, you have two files. One is the .db, and one is the .db-journal. The .db-journal is like very historical way of thinking about databases. So it's important to understand that when we insert data into a database, this is a transaction. So sometimes the transactions are like, sometimes you want to roll back a transaction for whatever reason. So the way in the past databases uses to roll back transaction is actually keeping an history of the action that has been happening on the database. And this tracking of the history is called the journal of your database. So SQLite, because it's just a light version of a SQL database, still have the concept of DB and DB-journal. So when, for example, a user insert a new record into the database, the record gets stored into habittracker.db, and the action of inserting the data is stored inside the journal. Anyway, what we can do, we can click on habit tracker. Then let me zoom out. Yeah. Zoom out a little bit. So we can click on this file, and then you see this red box. There are two icons on my right side. One is an icon that goes on the left, and this is pull. This helps you pull data from the device into your file system or into your laptop. And the second one is push data into the device. So once I click my habittracker.db, I can click the pull of the file from the device. So now it will ask me to save the file. I will save in my desktop or wherever. So now I have the DB. So with the DB, I have two options. One option is to use the command line, as all of us like. Another option for people that don't want to fiddle with the command line is actually to use this tool, DB Browser for SQLite. So this is an open source project that you can download this application, and it will help you to visualize DB files in a more intuitive way. So once you go and open the database here, you can then see the whole, under the database structure tab, you can see your database structure. So let me zoom in. So I'm inside database structure in my DB browser for SQLite, and I can see the whole structure of my database. So I can see I have a habit tracker with the ID, date, habit, comment. I can also see the data type in here. And interestingly, I can also see the create table statement. So if I want to recreate this table, for example, in my local instance of SQLite 3, because you can have that running also in your Mac or Windows machine, I can grab the SQL statement from this view. So this first screen will give me an understanding of how the database looks like directly from the DB exported from the emulator. Cool. So there is another part. So I can also do fancy stuff with SQL if I just want to practice my SQL skill. So if I tap or if I click on execute SQL, I will have my my kind of console where I can write a SQL statement. And this is particularly useful if you want to practice your SQL skill, or if you are thinking about a particular query and you want to understand the result that comes from it. Another thing you can click on is this tab that is Browse Data. So let me open another screenshot for that. I need to use screenshot, unfortunately, because my machine yesterday I tried to do this real time, and the voice and the audio was quite bad. So I click on Browse Data. I'm still in DB browser for SQLite. I click on Browse Data, and remember here to make sure the table you select is the table of the habit tracker. By default, it might be something completely different. So please, please, please make sure that the table is the correct one. And then you have a very intuitive way, like it looks like a spreadsheet of seeing your data. So this is, for example, the data from my application. And you can do also adding record, as you can see here with this button, or you can delete record with this other button. So this type of way of seeing the database is quite useful if you are building a UI and you want to see how the UI reacts with a specific set of information. So what you can do, you can, for example, create the database. So let the app create the database, export it, then use, for example, this tool to add and adjust some fields that you want to test, some edge cases or some like specific scenarios. Once you do that, you can push the data into the device using Android Device Monitor. And here we go. Now your emulator will have your specific set of data that you can test on, and you don't need to manually insert the data in the SQL database. So hopefully this one was useful. I'm going to stop the sharing. And here we go, I'm back. I'm gonna check also the Slack. I hope this makes sense. And the tool I've used, the one to display the SQL database, is called DB Browser for SQLite. I can post the link. DB Browser, this one, here we go. Okay, but if you're still interested in Stato, we can have a look maybe after the break. I think in 10, let's say, maybe we can go on a break now, and we can see also Stato and how you can look at database from that point of view, if you are interested in the tool itself. I think we have time this morning. If you're interested also in different type of emulators, one that I really recommend, especially if you, for example, are part of a development team, maybe it's worth having a look at Genymotion. Just put the link in there. Genymotion is very highly performant emulator, and like long time ago when Android was still not very good in terms of performance of the emulator that come out of the box, Genymotion was the way to go in terms of emulator. And they also have a very like up-to-date emulators as well. So you have not the fear like you're missing out on the latest OS on the device. Okay, so I think we can go on a break. So I will be back in 15 minutes, and maybe we can, if I think most of you, from what I can understand, you want to have a look at Stato and um, how you can explore database in that application. So let's go back in 15 minutes, and we can look together at how to first install Stato, make it work, and then look at the database from there using the Habit Tracker app. Cool. So see you in about 15 minutes then. See ya. And we are back. So let me share again on the Slack channel the link for the YouTube. Okay. So what we saw in the first part of the morning was a way to explore the database using a root device. And in our case, because we don't want to mess up with our phone, we decided to use the emulator. And what we use with the emulator is what Android Studio provide out of the box. That is actually what Android SDK provide out of the box. That is an Android device monitor, and then we use it to extract a DB file, and also we look at what a DB journal is and and why we have that file there. We managed to extract the file, the DB file, and then we had two options. We could either read that file using a command line, so open SQLite 3, and if you are interested to see how to do that, sorry. If you are interested to see how to do that from command line, I'm more than happy to show, maybe after this part. Or for people that don't want to mess around with the command line, we can also use a tool called DB Viewer, DB Browser for SQLite that I posted in the Slack channel. And we were able to see the database, see the data, inside make amendments, like adding a new record, delete a new record, also modify the existing record. And we were also able to see the structure of the database. So what were the fields, what was the data type, and the SQL statement to recreate the table. Now, all of these is possible if you want to use an emulator, or by any chance you have a rooted device. But another option is, like some of you guys, I think Mikhail was mentioning that earlier on, is to use your actual phone. So I have my phone with me, and I'm going to, we're going to use another tool provided by Facebook called Stato. Stato can do a variety of things, like Android device monitor, but for now, we will just look into how can we look at the database from our device. So my device is not a rooted device, and I'm gonna install Stato because it will require some steps. I will install Stato, I will upload the app on my device, and then we will jump into the browser to see what we can do and how can we get information about the database. Cool. So this is a non-rooted device, is whatever device you might have at home or you are using for development. So let me share my screen. Share. Cool. So thumbs up if you can see my screen, just so I know. Let me check. Is my screen shared correctly? Can you still see my screen? Okay, cool, fantastic. So for ease of code walkthrough, I have already a couple of implemented Stato, so that there is no need for like actually writing of the code. But I will go step by step into that. So this is my Android Studio. It might have a different setup than most Android developers, and this is because like my background, I'm used to have on the left side, my view for the project is actual project and not Android. And this is because like I'm used to IntelliJ and for like 10 years. So, so it's very difficult for me to like get familiar with Android view. But anyway, so on the left side, I have my projects, and then I will go through all the steps you will need to have a Stato in your app, and then how we move it from there. So Stato is a library, and for this reason, you will need to make some adjustment in your code base to be able to make use of it. And this is the part where I don't quite like it, because if you think about it, you are installing a library in your application that is not of any use for the user, but you are only use that for your personal debugging. And if you think about that, maybe you start thinking like me, like why do I need to put a library in the application that might make the application slightly bigger if the user doesn't get any benefit from it? So there are these things, but anyway, it's another tool and it's worth knowing. So the first things, because it's, let me go into presentation mode. Cool. So the first things is you can go in your, what is it? In your build or Gradle of the app where you have set up all the dependencies. So by default, I had all these dependencies in my application. And they came out of the box because I've just used the wizard to create my skeleton app together with the JUnit. So first things first is to add com.facebook.stato, and I think the latest version is 1.5.0. Just double check on their website. This is add, the application will ask you to resync. So make sure you do that. So for Stato to be able to inspect your application, this is not enough. Another thing you can do, you will need to create your custom application class. So maybe you are already familiar with the concept of creating your own application class. So by default, Android have the application. And this class is quite useful to handle everything that is related to a global, everything that has a global impact on the application state. So if you think about, I don't know, singleton or other like things that you might need on a global level of application, this class is the one for you. So when you build the app, by default, your application already use, your app already use this application class. But if you want to add your custom global variable, you need to extend this application. So I have created a very simple habit tracker application that extend application. And the only thing I need to do for Stato to work, to have the onCreate. So the onCreate is an override of the parent onCreate. And in it I do a super, so I call the onCreate of the parent, and then I initialize Stato with default values. There are lots of different options in case you want to do other type of operation with Stato. For example, if you're interested in network diagnosis, then you might want to add other line of code in here to like configure Stato. One thing very important, and I think I completely skip it. Just let me check that everything is okay, yeah. So one thing I skip it in here because I want to keep this code walkthrough quite simple, is that in theory, this type of inspector tool should be disabled if your app is gonna go into production. So if you're thinking about using Stato and you want to disable for the release build, one thing you can do is either create a flavor of your Android build that completely ignore Stato, and this can be your release build. One other thing you can do is still have the library imported, but when it comes to your habit tracker application, you might want to have some more line of code here that only initialize Stato when you are in debug mode and not in release mode. And this is for one simple reason. So your application is already quite vulnerable to possible attack if you don't follow like Android recommendation. Having a tool that is able to inspect the app by going into your Chrome browser is like opening a back door to your application. It might be completely safe because it only does read operation, but exposing the app to this type of access from outside, it's quite, I would say I will not feel comfortable to have an app in the market with Stato enabled. Cool. So this is one. So once I do that, it's very important. So recap a little bit, just because I went a little bit off topic. One, import the library into your app Gradle build file. Second, create a habit tracker application that extend Android application with the initialization of Stato inside the onCreate. And last but not least, you should also, no, I don't need this. Also, you should go, let me go like this. You should go in your Android manifest and actually add under your application tag a new attribute called Android name that refer to habit tracker application. So I pause it for a moment because this is quite important. By default, if you have created your app with the wizard, you have something like this. So you don't have the line at all, because by default, your Android application is gonna go to the Android application and is gonna get the global setup from there. Create a custom implementation of application, you need to remember to have that set up in your Android manifest. If you don't do that, your class will be completely ignored. So making sure you have the Android manifest updated with your custom application because otherwise it will get ignored. So once we have that, I'm ready to run my app. So I go and run my application on my Google device. Cool. I'm just checking every now and then because yesterday I had quite big problem with my setup. So the app is nice and running. Doesn't do much. Let's see if I have. I would like to show you the application, but I might have to. Okay. Let me go out of the screening and then I show you that the application is actually running. Okay, so see now, here we go. I have my habit tracker running. It doesn't do much because, as I said, the application doesn't require any UI. So for now, it's just blank. Cool. So I can share again my screen, and now I will walk you through how to see the database. So share the screen. I might create a new window. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go to this URL, Chrome. In fact, I put it in here just because maybe it's you can see it. You open your Chrome browser and then go to this URL. So copy from here and paste it. Actually, did I do something wrong? Yes, of course. Oh, here we go. Let me copy it again in here. Yeah, here we go. My misspelling. See, always good to have it ready because you never know. Okay, so this is the URL. You can actually remove this one. It will go by default, but use Chrome : / inspect / and you arrive to this page. So let me increase the size. So you can see you have on the left side, let's see if everything is working. Yes. Cool. Sorry, I need to just like step in every now and then just to make sure. So on the left side, I have devices, pages, extension, apps, so my menu. And on the right side, I have the information I'm looking for. So in here, where I can see all my devices, I have remote target, that is basically my Chrome browser. And then I have the Pixel device. So this is my app. As you can see, maybe I'll zoom it a little bit more. And let's see if I can scroll. No, I cannot scroll it anymore. Okay, so you can see here, maybe I will highlight it. You can see here, this is my app name, version 1.0, fine. And I can see also the name of my app, Habit-Tracker, powered by Stato. So at this point, what I can do, I can click on inspect. So recap again. I went to this URL in my Chrome browser and I land on this page. On this page, I should already have all the list of devices that are recognized by Chrome itself, plus my application. So I should find in the screen my app name. And I can also understand that this is powered by Stato. So Stato is up and running and is able to find my application. If this is not working, or if you don't see your app, most likely it's because you forgot to put your custom application, you forgot to define your custom application into the Android manifest. So just remember that. Cool. So this is my app, and what I want to do is actually click on inspect. So for any one of you that is familiar with web development, this is exactly the same console or the same screen as what you will see if you were debugging or analyze your web page. So you have exactly the same tabs. Not so sure if it's visible in here. Maybe I can zoom it. So you can see here, this is my developer tools. And for who of you are familiar with web development, or if you have ever done some inspection of web pages, this is exactly the same interface. So you have elements. Elements is the one where you can see the actual app itself. So you can go here, you can see that you have a navigation bar background, a status bar, all the information about, if you click on it, you can get all the information about the style. It treats your app exactly as it was a web page. Network, so this is quite useful if your app is performing any HTTP request to a backend. So if the app is doing something, as well as you will see in a web page, you will see all the code in here. Okay, sources. Now let's go for something a little bit more interesting. Resources. Resources is where you will find information about your storage. So you can have local storage and local file. So these are, for example, if you are able to, if you were part of Google Camera app, in local files, most likely it will be the list of the pictures that is saved. But what we are interested in for the Habit Tracker app is actually web SQL. So let me check here that everything is okay. Yes, okay, cool. So we are in developer tools, resources, web SQL. Web SQL is actually the SQL database of your app. So you can go and open this, and you can see your habittracker.db. You can go one step inside, one step in, and see the same thing we were seeing when we opened the DB file inside the DB browser for SQLite earlier on in the day. So you have your Android metadata, you have SQLite sequence, but also you have your habit tracker. So this is, for example, my database. Of course, there are lots of duplication because I keep restarting my app, and it's not very clever anyway. But what I can see is the list of the data in the file. What I cannot do here, I cannot make any changes. So this is just in a view mode. That is kind of all right for what we need. So this is Stato. It's quite interesting one, especially if you are concerned maybe about, if you don't want to run an emulator, for example, or if you want to, for example, just view the data and you don't want to have all the hassle of pull the DB file, open the DB file. You can get like instant feedback with this tool. However, if you want to do something a little bit more clever than that, then it might be your best choice might be to just download the DB file and re-upload it using a rooted device. But this is Stato. So I hope that cover what you were looking for. It's quite an interesting tool, and for whoever is familiar with web development or developer tools, they might find that a little bit more familiar than the Android device monitor that comes with the SDK. So if you're familiar with using elements or the way of debugging an application, this might be a little bit a better choice. And also you don't have to run the emulator. That sometimes for if you have not a very highly performant device, highly performance laptop, it might be quite it can be quite resource consuming. So this is another option. If there are any questions, I'm gonna stop the screen sharing. So 3 things to remember. 1 is to import the library. 2nd, to create the custom application class that extend application where you instantiate Stato. 3rd, configure your custom application into your Android manifest. And after that, the app can be like up and running on your device, and then you can use the Chrome inspect URL to actually view the resources. So that's another option that you can use. Cool. One other thing I wanted to do is to show you how to use the console, because it might also be a nice skill to have. Let me just check if there is any other things going on. Okay. Okay, cool. So we have 15 minutes before the next break. So I might show you how you can also view the database in a more, let's say, command line type of way. So we cover all of them basically. So either using DB browser, using Stato, and there is the 3rd option that actually should have been the first one, that is using the command line tool to open the database and look for information. Of course, this is a little bit more like typing. I'm just making sure my terminal is big enough so that I can share that. Okay. Cool. So let's start by saying that the command line, it kind of requires that you have already been able to extract the DB file from your device. So they can be done in like lots of different ways. The best way is maybe using a more intuitive way. It's maybe to use the Android device monitor. Of course, you need to be you need to have an emulator or, in general, a rooted device. But there are also other different ways you can do that. But let's leave that out for now. And let's just say that we want to, we have the DB file, and now we want to open and explore that. So one second, I will close another window because there is quite a lot of noise. Okay, cool. Close a little bit of windows. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cover in the last 10 minutes we have before the break some how to inspect your DB file, starting from the command line. So there are other ways. I think throughout the morning we saw Stato as one option. We saw using DB browser application as another option. But I think the easiest one without any installation will be to actually use the command line. So SQLite 3 is installed by default on Mac. For Windows, I think Udacity during the lessons about database basics also explain how you can install SQLite on a Windows machine. So if you are I'm on a Mac at the moment, but if you are on a Windows machine, feel free to follow the instruction from the Udacity database basics of the Android Basics Nano degree. They explain step by step how to install SQLite 3. Cool. So what I managed to do, I actually managed to have my let's this one be a little bit bigger. Cool. So this is my terminal. And what I have here, I think, yes. So what I have here, you can see I have habittracker.db and habittracker.db-journal. So I went into, like we saw this morning, I went into the Android device monitor and in using my emulator. And I have also managed to pull from the device both files. So the .db and the .db-journal. Hopefully the font is clear, but if it needs a little bit more zoom in, just let me know on the Slack channel. I will check. Okay, it looks like everything is fine. If you are not able to see the font on my command line, just let me know. So I pause it for a moment, unless I hear otherwise. Yeah, sometimes the Android device monitor can be a little bit nasty with like Android Studio and the emulator. So yesterday, for example, I had Android Studio open, I had the emulator open, and then I opened Android device monitor, and it was not displaying anything to me. So I had to close everything and just start just restart everything basically, and that helped. Sometimes it's just like the way ADB work between Android Studio, the emulator, and Android device monitor might conflict with each other. So sometimes restart work. So hopefully you can see my screen. I'm on my computer, and I'm, as you can see from these two files, I have pulled from the data from the device habittracker.db and habittracker.db-journal. I hope by now you already know how to get these files from the device. So if you still have any question about that, we can look at that together. So on a Mac device, SQLite is already part of the laptop. However, for Windows, you might need to follow some steps. In that case, Udacity, as a part of the lesson about database basics before the Habit Tracker project, has a tutorial on how to install SQLite 3 on a Windows. Anyway, I'm on a Mac machine, it's fine. So to open SQLite, I just called SQLite 3 and I enter. And now I'm inside SQLite. In here, if I don't know anything about stuff, let me zoom in like this, okay, cool. If I want to know more and I want the help, I can just type, ooh, this is not gonna work. So this is opening SQLite. If I type .help and enter, then I will get all the list of command that I'm able to perform in SQLite. But if I want to open a DB file, what I will be doing will be .open and then the file name. I think there is a suggestion in here as well. Of course, this type of command requires that you already know the structure of the database name, and so on and so forth. So for now, I know that my file is called habittracker.db. So to open the file, I do open habittracker.db. And now I am inside the database habit tracker. From here, I can do normal SQL statements. So select star from my table is called habit tracker, where ID equal 1, for example, and I get the first record. I can do something like select star from habit tracker, and then I get all the list of the record. I can also do update command, and I can do delete, and so on and so forth. But this is the type of flexibility you will have with the command line. Once you are done with that, to close SQLite 3 or to exit from the application, you type .exit, and you are back to your computer. So this was the command line. I thought it was worth mentioning, just because we cover lots of like third-party tools, and I thought it would have been good also to see the actual SQLite 3 integration. That shame we didn't cover that at the beginning. It should have been the first one. Cool. So in 5 minutes we are going in on a break again for 10 minutes, and then we have our last more or less hour to ask any question. Or also, if you have any curiosity about SQLite database or database in general, design, I'm more than happy, design of database, I'm more than happy to answer any question, because that's the last hour of this session. So make it count, I will say. Cool, let me catch up with things that has been going on. Yeah, Android device monitor can be quite flaky, but once you have it working, it has a very comprehensive set of um, tools that you can use to profile and understand the app. So yes, it might be a little bit hard to make it work the first time, but then once you have it up and running, it is actually very insightful into your application. What it will be useful for me to share with you is also if you are more a command line type of person. I also have the list of command line that you might find it interesting. So let me see. Yeah, so I think you can find that in Udacity as well, but I would like to share the list of the cheat sheet for SQLite in case you're interested. Here we go. So if you are more of a command line person, maybe you want to check that cheat sheet and like play around also with SQL statement, just because it's easier maybe to practice SQL statement from the command line rather than using a third-party tool, let's say. Cool. So I'll close this one. Cool. So we are going into the last break for the morning, and then we have about less than an hour to cover, 45 minutes, I would say, to cover any remaining question for the day. Yeah, so see you in about 15 minutes. Hello, welcome back. So I hope you are getting along fine with the Habit Tracker app. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put it into the Slack channel. I want to give some admin notice. So first of all, don't worry about the videos. They will all be published under the Udacity YouTube channel after this hackathon session. So early next week or at some point next week, they will share, Udacity will share the link with you. And the other thing is that if you have any question even after the hackathon, feel still free to put it into the Habit Tracker app. There are almost 1,000 people in this Slack channel, so I'm sure someone else might have the same problem and is able to help you. I also would like to thank you very much for the time you spent this weekend. It was very nice to see lots of people be online, lots of people following the live streaming, not only for the Habit Tracker app, but also for the other apps. It's really moving. So yeah, a really warm thank you for yesterday and also this morning. And also, if you manage to submit 1, 2, 3 apps as a result of this hackathon, share that into the channel, because it's a very nice thing to know from our point of view as a session leader, that we were able to help you through the process, and that these type of sessions are actually working and that are worth keeping. Cool. So I think there are no questions at the moment on the Slack channel. That is good. Maybe one last thing I want to mention about databases that might be something that sometimes is where you work on a very simple application like the Habit Tracker. You might not be able to see or think about. So let me share with you these. Oh, actually, I'll give you a brief explanation first of all. So one thing that, for example, when I work on database, I found like a very interesting use case is to actually use SQLite as a way to cache system, to cache data from the network, so that in a production app, you are able to give data to the user, even if the user might be offline, or even if the network might not be very reliable. So an interesting way to get use of SQLite is not just to store data input, the data that the user put into the app, but also data that are coming from the network, and then use that information as and cache that in the SQLite, so that if the user lose connection at some point, they can still have data, so they can still navigate throughout the application. So I have found a very nice diagram that explains how SQLite can help in like doing this caching system. So maybe I would like to walk you through that. And in the meantime, if you have any question, please feel free to put it into the Slack channel. I think this explanation might take a couple of minutes, so I still have the time afterwards, I think for about another half an hour to cover any question. Cool, so let me share my screen. Share, here we go. So that's a very interesting and easy way to explain a situation in which you might want to use SQLite as your caching mechanism. So here is called memory cache, but we can think of that as SQLite. So we have our device that is asking for data. So it performs this store.get. And the first things that we can do is actually asking, is there a data saved into the disk, for example? Is there any data saved in our SQLite? If there is, and also I would add it's a fresh data, think about a news app. A news app want to, as many times as possible, fetch the data from the back end. But sometimes it happens that the data is not that old, so it's okay to return a cache data. So in case I have data stored in my SQLite and they are, I will add, and there is fresh data, then I can just return cache data from the SQLite. If instead the data is not in SQLite or the data is quite old, let's say it's 1 day old, 2 days old, and we want to have a mechanism to refresh that information, then we will fetch data from the network, save the data into the SQLite, and then return the data from SQLite. In this way, we can have a mechanism to give the user always information without having the annoying situation where you have a loading spinner and a blank screen, like waiting for the user to, or waiting for the network to come back. A typical example, I would say, is what Twitter or Facebook are doing. So if you open Twitter at any point in time, you are never in a situation where you don't have any data on the screen. You always have some tweets when you open Twitter. You always display something. Never, I don't know, it never happened to me that I never opened Twitter and there was a blank screen or a loading spinner on a blank screen. So what's happened is that they are using the power of having SQLite to actually get all the data that has been loaded so far and displayed it to the user, and in the meantime do a background fetch of the most updated data from the network. When the data come back, the SQLite will get updated, and also the your UI will display a message say, there are 2 new tweets or 3 new tweets or 20 new tweets. And by clicking on that, what you are doing, you're actually displaying the latest data that have been inserted into the SQLite database. So something to consider, or maybe it's good if you explore other way the SQLite can be used. Maybe if you were talking with a backend developer, that sounded quite obvious to use like a caching mechanism for backend data. But on Android, a very typical use case is to actually use SQLite and have this mechanism of never display to the user a blank screen. So either display all the data and then update it, or do the update in the same time, let's say. So that's another little thing, so that if you are interested in this mechanism, it might be worth exploring as well, just because I found that it's useful to understand a little bit broader than just the scope of the habit tracker app. That is a very interesting scenarios of designing a database from scratch, but sometimes it's also good to think about other ways that you can use the tools that Android offer to deliver a better experience for the user. Cool. So there is a question about, is there a way to interact directly from Android Studio with a SQLite database running inside the emulator without exporting the database and then using SQLite command line interface? As far as I know, Android Studio as such doesn't have that ability. However, what you can do, you can use Android Device Monitor, as we've seen before, and all the other tools we have seen, or you can pull the data from the device, so the DB file from the device through the command line. But again, this is more of like knowing a command line on a terminal rather than something specific for Android. Unfortunately, Android Studio doesn't have a tool within the studio to do that. Oh, okay. I never had this problem. Quite interesting. All right. Oh, good to know. So there was a Stack Overflow message shared, and I think is very useful to understand what problem you might find. So how you can, there is a question about what's the command line for pulling out the database. So let me see if I can share my screen. I don't have the emulator running because if I try, my video will go horribly wrong. So what you can do is, let's see if it works on this device actually. So on the device that I have attached. Just need to try, because I don't want to use the emulator, otherwise the video will go horribly wrong. But I want to see if I can do that from my device. No, I cannot do that. But what I can do, I can show you how you can do that on an emulator. So let's see if I start the emulator, if the video still handle that. If the live streaming start going horribly wrong, then I might just stop it. So let me know if you notice any difference in the audio or the video, because I'm starting my emulator and I don't want that to interact with the live streaming. Okay, cool. Cool, fine. Okay, let's see. Just I'm waiting until my emulator is up and running, and then I will show you. I might need to reset up the machine. Just give me 1 second. We have time. Yes, we have half an hour, so it will be okay. So let me see. Okay, the emulator is running right now. I'll just give it some time. Okay, cool. So, okay, my emulator is up and running, is all good. Let me share my screen then. So you can do also on, I'm not so sure you can do on a real device, because there is still it's still a little bit of a challenge. But I show you how you can do that if you run your emulator, how you can pull the database from command line without opening like Android device monitor or all the other things. So let me share my screen with you. Here we go. So I will do this, share the entire screen. Cool. That's it. So what do I need? I need my terminal. And let me go into maybe yeah, I just don't want to have habit tracker already there. Let me delete it for the sake of clarity, because otherwise it gets a little bit too confusing. So I can move to trash this one. Okay, cool. Okay, fantastic. So now, if I do, can you see my screen? So let me know if you can read the command line. Hopefully it should be okay. A thumbs up is enough. Yeah, okay, cool. So let me open a new screen, actually. Okay, so if I do IDB devices, now I can see that I have attached my emulator. So my emulator is here. As you can see, it has the habit tracker installed, and yeah, it's recognized by ADB. That is always a good sign. Now, if we want to pull the database, we need also to be aware of the folder structure that Android follow. And this is the tricky part, because you either remember by memory, or you will need to go back and like search online about it. Cool. So now what I want to do, as I said, I'm on my root folder in here. And let's see, I want now to pull the database from my emulator using the command line. So I will be doing ADB, and then I do pull, and I start my folder location. So unfortunately, this is something you either remember, you look online, or, and this is why maybe Android Device Monitor is a better choice, you actually look at it on the Android Device Monitor. But anyway, you do ADB pull, and then the folder structure is data, and then data again, and then you have the name of your app. So now, unfortunately, I need to go back to Android Studio because I don't remember, is this one. So your app name, just to avoid assumption, your app name is the one that is defined in your Android manifest. So I copy this one because I'm lazy and I will not remember also this information. Okay, so ADB pull data slash data slash data slash your app name slash databases is plural slash, and this should be the name of your database, habit tracker.db. Cool. So you press enter, and here we go. It pull. So maybe if it was a little bit smaller, you would see the whole wording. What it's doing is just pulling the database from the device into the location where I'm performing the command. So now, if I do a list of all the files in this location, I should be able to find my habit tracker.db. Here we go. So habit tracker.db. At this point, I can do SQLite 3. Cool. And I can do .open habit tracker.db. And now I can do select star from habit tracker, where let's say ID equal 1. So that's your way to do that. Yeah, so I hope that was clear. So the command is ADB pull, and then the location is data app name databases with the plural, and then this is the name of your database. So this is the command you might want to use. Cool. I always underestimate that people might be interested in the command line. I'm a big fan of that because just to give me much more flexibility of what I can do. So I'm not actually restricted into any of the like tools and stuff. Sometimes the tools are useful because they are faster, but they are limited to what the developer decided to expose you in terms of functionality. So maybe this is interesting. So ADB pull, but just remember to have the location of the database. So there is a certain things to remember. That I might just put it as a part of the things. Is data. This is your app name So it's /data, /app name, /databases, /database names dot name.db. Cool. So I think we have about 20 minutes or so left. If there is any question, I don't want to like talk about things that you might not find useful, especially if you are building the app while being online and listening the live streaming. If there is anything that is unclear or anything that requires more explanation, you can watch a code walkthrough from yesterday afternoon, but also this morning at the beginning of the live streaming event, I did a second round of code walkthrough just in case someone were not available yesterday. Fantastic. Okay. Cool. Nice. Thank you for sharing, Thomas. It's very good to not only know like comment and questions about the app, but also know that thanks to the video or to collaborating with other people, you are able to find the solution you're looking for and also being able to pass the project. So well done. Okay, so maybe to solve Jordi problem, it might be useful if I open my app again and I go through my Android Studio. So just for, let me go in presentation mode. Here we go. So let's start with the contract. So in my app, I have an ID, and then I have 3 columns, date, habit, and comment. Cool. So that is the first step. And we went through the importance of contract, but I cannot stress you a lot about how more and more apps, I saw that they basically, for to be quick, they just like type in the name of the column throughout the application, and then it's very hard if you want to make any changes. So this is my contract. What it's also useful to know is to go into, what's the name, helper. Oops. Here we go, the helper. So before going into the actual insert, make sure when you do the creation, so your creation has all the 4 columns: ID as an integer, primary key, auto increment, column date, habit, and comment. So making sure you have all of them. So this is very important. And also, if you make any changes here in the onCreate, remember to delete the app and reinstall, unless you have implemented the onUpgrade and you have upgrade the version of your database. And this is why, because as soon as Android knows that the database is already created, if the version hasn't changed, it doesn't matter how many changes you have made here, they will not count. So make sure that if you change this statement inside the onCreate, you delete and reinstall the app. Because, or, and this is a little bit more sophisticated, you implement the onUpgrade and then increase the database version. Okay, so once you have that, your insert should just be fine. My suspicion is that maybe there was a change happen here, and maybe the app hasn't been like deleted and reinstalled. So just making sure that this onCreate is correct, and also that you delete and reinstall the application. Let me know how it goes. If you also want to share a snippet of code, that works as well. I think we have about 10 minutes. So I'm not saying that I'm that fast to find problem in code, but here we go. So let's see. So this is your create statement. I'm just copy somewhere. Okay. I will try to delete the comment about any other option for the create command. So see how that goes. And also making sure you have, I don't know how the comma sep variable looks like, because it will be interesting to see exactly how the final string after all this composition looks like, to make sure you have the correct create statement. One other things you can do is to actually log, add verbose log, where you print out how this SQL create habit tracker table looks like after he has done all the appending. So okay, what I can do, I can try on my my application, it might be easier. Sometimes it's also quite useful to have a log mechanism already in place so that you can just start tracking information and you don't need to worry too much about the debugger. So let's see. And then I said, so I'm just adding some logging and print out the string because I want to understand how like the string I have and the string you created are different. And let's see. 1, 2. Okay, let me run my application. If in the meantime someone found the problem, feel free to share. I'm just copying the statement in my local copy so that I can check what are the difference between the two SQL statements. Run up. Yeah, I think Thomas' comment is correct. You will need, I actually haven't noticed that. Thank you very much for noticing. There is a semicolon missing in the statement. So maybe that's the difference between the two. But I'm checking at the same time, so. Try with that. Try with adding the semicolon. I would say the semicolon should be after the last parenthesis, the one that close your create table. Cool. Well done, Thomas, for spotting that. Good catch. All right. I think we have the last 5 minutes left. So if there is any other questions, feel free to ask. Cool. So if there are no more questions, I will wrap up for the day. Once again, I would really like to thank you for being online yesterday and today. Yesterday, almost 8 hours we did of live streaming, and today other 3 hours. That has been fantastic. It's very nice from me personally to see people actually build things on Android. For me, Android was just like, oh, I want to build something that I can see on my device, coming from like 10 years of backend. So it's very good to see other people on that same journey of like building amazing app. I hope your Android Basics Nano degree goes very well. And I hope also we will see each other again in another maybe live streaming hackathon, meetup in London. If you like are here in London, just ping me, we can meet up. And I'm sure Android World is such a small place that we will see each other again. So good luck for the rest of the Nano degree, and keep me posted how it goes. Have a nice evening.